Now, for this part of the podcast, we're absolutely delighted to welcome Radio Merseyside's Giulia Bould. How you doing, Giulia? You okay?
I'm all right. I'm a bit shell-shocked. It's been 24 hours and a bit there, yeah. It's been a lot going on, and I'm also a bit uncomfortable because I usually ask the questions. So be nice.
Now, I'm sure most of you will know precisely why Giulia is here and probably will have listened to some of her work so far. But Giulia, yesterday, we're recording this on Friday morning. Yesterday, Thursday, your series, your secret series that you've been working away on for it's been a year of your life, hasn't it? Where you've been working with Everton. The amount of times, I think, over the past 6 months, someone has said to me, just imagine if someone was doing like an Amazon or a Netflix-style documentary inside Everton during that season. And one of the things I always wanted to say, but couldn't, was, well, actually, there is somebody that's kind of doing something very, very similar.
Yeah.
And now we've got the fruits of your labour, haven't we? The new podcast series, Everton, Nothing Will Be the Same, 10 parts, BBC Sounds, went online on Thursday. I've already binged most of it. I'm sure Chris has as well. I mean, how's it been? How's the reaction been?
It's been incredible. I didn't sleep the night before, and yeah, as you say, it's been a complete secret life. And that people have said to me, oh, imagine if someone had been in Everton. And I was like, yes, because I couldn't say where I was. Very few people knew. I know you knew where I was, but there was very, very few people that knew, and I've had to lie to friends, haven't even known where I was. I was completely hidden away. And yeah, the reaction has been just insane in the most fantastic way. I couldn't sleep, so I watched on BBC Sounds as each episode uploaded at 6 a.m. yesterday, and I was terrified. And you hope these things go down well, and you hope there's enough insight in there. But people have just, you know, even non-football fans have been in contact saying, I am binging this. People were messaging at 3 a.m. this morning saying, I've not gone to bed. I've got to listen to the end of this. And that's just the best compliment ever. And I'm so pleased that Everton fans, especially that fan base, can now get some insight into what went on, some decision making that went on, reasons why for things, and how people were feeling. Because I think, you know, everyone from the outside could see it was a roller coaster. Although someone said to me, don't call it a roller coaster because there was too many lows, not enough highs. Yeah. But it was a roller coaster. It was everything. Because if you think, you know, the Brighton result was a high, wasn't it, near the end of the season, that came out of nowhere. Yeah. You know, Bournemouth, the last...
Not for Kevin Farwell.
Well, no, I mean, that's it. The quote in there that, yeah, he was wondering if Everton can hang on. I mean, that happened last weekend against Bournemouth. Someone in front of me at 3 up went, I think we need a fourth and we might win this. I mean, I love that kind of humour from the Everton fans. But yeah, it's been amazing, and thank you. I've had so many messages. I'm trying to get through them all. So if people are messaging to say what they think. But yeah, thank you for listening, first of all, anyone that is. And yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit in shock, I think.
Just, you said there, obviously, it was 6 o'clock, they all went online. What time was the first reaction that you got?
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Everton fans, a couple of Everton fans were very clever because the landing page with a tiny trailer was there ready, only for the sake of the BBC uploading it. And a couple of people found it and messaged me and said, is this anything to do with you? And I sort of had to deny anything and ignore anything and said, I don't know what it is. Probably by 6:45, 45 minutes, well, and I think the first one's about 42 minutes.
At least somebody gave you
so it didn't take long.
Gave you the courtesy of listening to an episode before commenting.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get into content shortly, but if we just talk about some of the logistics first, can you just explain to us just what was it, how did this work? Where you were inside Finch Farm, how long for, how did that operate?
It feels like I was in there forever. So what happens is BBC Sound struck up an access agreement with the club, and then I'm put into the club.
When was that?
November.
November.
So just after the double Bournemouth week, I sort of went in, had my own little desk and things and place to work, which was right by the canteen, which was really handy. And then I have to strike a balance with the club while I'm in there. So we did have an access agreement, and yeah, it's up to me then being in there to negotiate where I'm going, what we're doing, and you don't know what you're making. We genuinely went in there to make, I think off the back of the previous season, an insight into Frank Lampard and how he's going about rebuilding a club, and how do you take on the likes of, you know, Newcastle with huge amounts of money behind them, and these huge clubs with a colossal amount of money, and how he's negotiating that as a young manager. And that was sort of the premise for the series.
When was the access agreement signed? Like how much pre-work had it taken to get you in there for November?
I don't know, because I wasn't involved in sort of the to and fro in. It went on quite a long time. But as soon as it was signed, I was dropped in.
And of course, I suppose if you'd arrived just after that difficult week with Bournemouth and Leicester, then you'd have had the World Cup break to kind of acclimatise for it. I think when we look back on that period, I mean, me and Chris often speak about it, just very much felt like the beginning of that season under Frank Lampard. I mean, I made reference to him in match report against Bournemouth last week. Obviously, they won 3-0 under the October sunshine. Things started to look better, just like 12 months ago when they did with Crystal Palace under Frank Lampard. You think we're making steps forward here, and it felt like there was a lot of, and I don't think it was necessarily naive, but a lot of hope and optimism around the club. It's the late summer of last year, you had Frank Lampard, and you had good people that seemed to be doing good things, like nice, good PR savvy, media friendly people, which does help, I think, for image of the club and relations to the club. Like Sir Connor Cody, James Tarkowski, Seamus Coleman, as well as Frank. They're good talkers, aren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, how did you find the atmosphere when you went in there? Because I'm sure you got on very well and everybody wanted to help you.
It was still positive. I mean, a couple of results, as we know, the double Bournemouth week, as it became known, wasn't ideal. But I think everyone just had it down as a bit of a blip week. And it was an odd season, wasn't it? Everybody knew the season was stopping. And do you know what? Frank Lampard was so liked. Even up to his final day and him going, he was so liked by everybody. And I can't state that enough. He was, he would speak to everybody. He was great with me. He didn't have to be good with me. He could have just, when the microphone's on. But no, he'd check on training if I was okay, because it was freezing up at Finch Farm. And, the kit men would come out and bring me a coat and stuff like that, extra coat and extra gloves and things. And everybody looked, all his staff, Ashley Cole, Joe Edwards, good people. And I think there was a lot of positivity. I think obviously people were concerned by those couple of results, but I don't think anyone anticipated what was about to happen once the restart came and the Wolves game happened on Boxing Day. And he was a good person who was great with me and the series, and that kind of shows the person he is. Yeah.
I mean, it really was an interesting week. I think with hindsight, it's easy to look back on that Leicester Bournemouth as the week that kind of set in motion the series of events that probably led to Frank Lampard's departure. But at the time, it wasn't as obvious, was it? I don't think so. And I think it's easy to kind of, with the benefit of hindsight, say, it was always going to go from wrong at that point. It wasn't. There were plenty of opportunities to pick things back up through.
Yeah, and he had the dressing room. Yeah. He had the dressing room. Everybody liked him. And that's a huge thing in football. You being liked is a massive thing. He was motivating people. Yeah, now you can look back and I know, people wanted a knee-jerk reaction maybe in that World Cup break, but I don't think anyone could have anticipated what was about to happen.
No. So, I mean, through January then, obviously, that would have hit you hard and come at you very fast, I should imagine. And obviously, the supporters know it through the day-by-day, well, probably for the week-by-week events, game, transfer story, etc. And then obviously some of the other stuff that happened around there. But for you, being based at Finch Farm, that would have been almost, not even a day-by-day, but an hour-by-hour kind of experience for you that month. What was January like?
It was difficult, and it's hard when you're making a series like this because you want to get that insight, but you also, and I'm a bit over polite, and I'm thinking, I don't know if to go and shove a microphone under somebody's face in this point because it's really difficult. But what was nice, and genuinely, in Finch Farm, you go through the gates, you drive in, and it's like a world of its own. And despite the fact, you'd come out the gates and you'd feel, the stress and the pressure of everything. In there, it was working similar. Training was operating. Players were still doing the same routine. Obviously, outside, there's all the headlines, there's all the talk, there's all the fan debate, everything's going on. But in there, it did feel a bit like business as usual. I think the toughest week in January was after Frank Lampard was sacked, because everybody felt it, because he was a good guy. You don't want to. I remember he was an England legend, and with his shirt on and scoring for England, and his Premier League legend. And you don't want to see that happen to somebody. And, he tried. He gave everything. I
think you could see very much as well that he lived it, didn't he?
He did.
You could see.
He went for a run round Finch Farm and people would stop him and chat to him. He loved.
Moved up here during the week, didn't he?
He loved being part of Everton.
Not only did he love being a part of Everton, but also he was an obsessive, wasn't he? He was an addict to that job. And
he worked hard. He'd be there. I mean, I'd do some long hours in Finch Farm. And it was when it was dark, early in the morning, it was dark by about 4:30. And I'd usually arrive before 9. He was already there, he'd already been in a few hours. I sometimes wasn't leaving until 6, 7 o'clock at night. He was still there. He was working really hard to put it right. And I can see why he got as long as he did. I don't think, anybody, I said before, I don't think anyone anticipated how it would go, and maybe Frank now doesn't particularly. I don't know. I'd love to hear from Frank. Whether or not we ever will, I don't know. But yeah, it maybe wasn't as highly pressurised as what it felt outside being in there, because everyone just had this steely focus to ensure that things were trying to be put right.
And obviously you didn't hear from Frank around that period, but what we do, the vehicle to talk us through that period is Seamus Coleman, who, obviously, we all know how well he comes across and just what a wonderful ambassador he is for the club. I thought it was really kind of powerful the way he spoke around that time and the impact that something like as big as that has on on a football player, because we look at these players and they play millions of things like that, and I think sometimes we forget that they also have the stresses of work and uncertainty and the knock-on impact that has on their lives as well. I mean, that interview with Seamus was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's all him. He's a genuine person, and I'm glad. I know there's been a lot of comments online about Seamus, all extremely positive, and I'm pleased for that, because that is who he is. There's you don't flick a microphone on and he comes out with it. That's who he is on and off the microphone in the series. But nobody felt it more than him. Nobody feels it. He lives in the city. He says in it, if anyone's listened, that there were some school drop-offs he didn't do because, he felt so responsible for the situation. He'd take his kids out at 7 o'clock at night, in the hope that, he could kind of get through that. And, he said to me on tape and off, he would think about it all the time. He was thinking about it at night. He was thinking about it driving. And, no one felt the burden more than him. And I think that's just who he is. Everton is his club, as he says.
One of the things I found quite interesting as well is I think through some of the more difficult periods of last season, and to a certain extent still now, I think one of the issues that a lot of people have is communication, or effective kind of engagement and communication between those from inside the club and without it. Now, you've effectively had a lot of exclusives here. You're the only person really who through this has been able to deliver any insight to that period of time. And one of the things that struck me most was, we talk about Seamus there, but also you have a degree of access to Kevin Farwell, is just how eloquent and how engaging some people within that club are when they're given that platform to talk. They make a good case for showing what was going on and perhaps giving a little bit of a side of stories and an insight that we didn't have at the time.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of Kevin Farwell in it. Obviously, it features throughout the series, and then Mark Chapman came along to Finch Farm in the summer and did a big conversation with him as well. He is a fascinating man. He's a hard-working man. His office is filled with files and everything, it's an open door policy as well. The door's always propped open. He, as you said, eloquent. I found him honest, which I hope everybody hears that again, a very honest guy who just wants to find the plan that's going to put Everton back where it should be. And, his dad is a Blue. He talks about that and he goes, I'm straight on the phone to my dad because no one gives me more pressure than him. And he's very well liked. I think quite. It was interesting putting the microphone in front of him because I wasn't totally sure how it would go each time. But once you get him talking, he's very passionate. But away from the microphone, he's quite quiet. Just goes about his daily business and he gets on. He's hardworking. He gets his head down and he's doing what he's doing. Quite quiet,
but obviously one of my favourite bits when I take my professional hat off and trying to microanalyse everything he says is what he talks about. Being at Molineux, the penultimate game of the season, and not being able to refrain from celebrating when Yerry Mina's late goal went in. I think myself and Chris were there. It was quite interesting. I wrote about it at the time. Being in the press box, that was a situation that was replicated across most of the Everton staff and a lot of the Everton media, and it was quite interesting because there was actually almost a bit of a dispute after between some of the home fans, angered by the away people in
but
that area celebrating.
It just meant that much, didn't it?
And I just thought that again, it just gave such a wonderful insight into the human side of these people and what they're going through, and I think that really is something that is really powerful and useful for Everton fans to get that insight, which obviously you've been able to deliver. Chris, I know you've obviously listened to a lot of it. I mean, what bits stand out for you?
Yeah. Well, Giulia's obviously spoken about the way Frank Lampard was great, and he's a real natural with people, and even the way Kevin Farwell, Seamus Coleman was. Sean Dyche on his appointment, he did one of the first things he says, I'm a Marmite manager. People, I sort of polarised opinion. And we can see the way he is in press conference, very business-like. But you see, show us a different side of Sean Dyche there within the podcast.
Yeah, do you know what? Somebody said to me, who's the person you enjoyed recording with the most? It was Sean Dyche.
Really?
And I know, and everyone says that. Really? I think he's so funny. He's got a very dry sense of humour. I think in a press conference, that's Sean Dyche, the manager at a press conference. I think that's, but fascinating to hear who he is as a person, his relationship with Ian Wone, his assistant. They've been friends for so long, them two together. We did some recording with them together, and I literally sat in a room for a good hour and a half, and it was the funniest hour and a half I think I've ever had. And again, hard-working people. I sound like I'm repeating myself, but the people in there put the hours in. Sean Dyche puts the hours in, Ian Wone puts the hours in, Steve Stone puts the hours in, who the banter with them as well is brilliant in that, Steve Stone seems to be the fall guy for a lot of their jokes, but that's their friendship. They've all been friends so long, and, you can't, that's not a work relationship, that's much more than that. And you'll hear that they say, their kids are best mates, they all know each other, they best man at each other's wedding and all that kind of thing. A lot. That's kind of the thing that everyone stood out. They've all said Seamus is a legend. I know that's been now a debate because he refuses it and he will hate me for repeating it again, but he's a legend. Kevin Thelwell's insight is fantastic, but everyone else has been going, Sean Dyche, I didn't know he was like that.
I think another fascinating character that again is interspersed throughout the series, and I found it really interesting listening towards the end. That's Jimmy Martin, of course.
Oh, Jimmy.
And that bit where he talks about the Bournemouth week, the last week of the season, and how draining it was. I think within the insight, obviously we all hear from the club's perspective. I think it helps us all to understand a lot more about what was going on at the time, and gives us a little bit more of the reasoning behind some of the decisions were being made. But obviously it was still a very, very draining week for everybody. And if ever you kind of want a glimpse back at that, listening to Jimmy Martin describe that last week.
He hits it spot on, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And that final game was just a lot. And I did speak to Tarky at the end of that game, which you hear as well, and Sean, who was a bit, I think, still keyed up from it when he was talking to me. And then when you hear in the bonus episode, I went back in July and sat in his office, which is the funniest office ever because it's just 2 chairs and a desk.
No pictures, nothing.
Nothing. The shelves behind it, big shelves, empty, completely empty.
How did that compare to when Frank was in there?
I didn't go in with. I wasn't invited in the office when Frank was in there. We used to use it so kind of like a meeting office. But Sean, allowed me a few times in his office, which I didn't. I said to him, I feel like I'm about to be told off. I said it's like going in the headmaster's office, and he went, no. He went, some telling's off, go on in here.
Did you get an office?
I did have a little office. Yeah. It wasn't as fancy.
No.
But there wasn't any pictures in that either. I was too busy, to be honest. It was more where I dumped my coat and my bag in the morning and then I was off.
Well, Giulia, the series is absolutely fantastic.
Thank
you for delivering it, and congratulations. It really is a wonderful piece of work. And
thank you. It was a big team as well. I mean, I was in Finch Farm, but a big team. So I just want to say massive thank you to BBC Studios for doing it. BBC Sounds for putting it out there. Mark Chapman, I think, is amazing narrating it as well. And a massive thank you to everyone at Everton, because it couldn't have been done without them. And I know sometimes, as you said, there may be some criticism, but actually they opened the doors, they let me stay in, and many clubs wouldn't have done at that point with all those things going on. So massive thank you to everyone at Everton.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming in. And please, I can't urge you. I know this is one podcast and we shouldn't be pushing other podcasts, but just listen to it. BBC Sounds, wherever you get your podcast from, it really, especially during an international break as well. I mean, if ever you've got a bit of spare time to not be panicking about the game-to-game pressures, then this is it, isn't it? Listen to it. It's brilliant. Thanks, Giulia.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Giulia for coming to talk to us about that series. And I really can't stress just how good it is and how worthwhile it is to spend a little bit of time during this international break and listening to that and getting some of that insight from across last season. Now, Chris, obviously we're recording this now on Friday morning. Thursday night, a couple of 12 hours or so ago as it's recording, Everton released a statement just in relation to Bill Kenwright. I think it's probably important that we mentioned that whilst on the show. The club said that he'd undergone a major medical procedure to remove a cancerous tumour from his liver, had a prolonged period in intensive care, but he's now recovering at home. And I think that I think we'd all wish him a speedy recovery and send our best thoughts to him and his family and friends and that as well, of course.
Yeah, it says it's expected to be probably a long process, but one that will hopefully lead to a full recovery. yeah, I'm sure that whatever anybody's personal thoughts are about the situation at the top of Everton and the hierarchy, that everyone will have to wish the Chairman Bill Kenwright the best of health.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now we're in the middle of an international break, and we've had a little bit of succour essentially from the Everton from the Everton series released by the BBC. That's given us a few things to talk about. There's also been a few other bits and pieces of news as well, hasn't there? Mm-hmm. Obviously, one thing that we have learned this week is something that we always expected to be the case, or from a few days earlier, but it's now ratified that Everton's new stadium will be hosting games for Euro 2028 when it comes to the UK and Ireland after Turkey's withdrawal from the process. Again, we expected this was going to be the case, but it's a big boon, not just for the club, but also for the city and the wider region, isn't it?
Definitely. Like you say, it did have a certain inevitability about it for the last week.
And inevitability.
Yeah, there you go. The UK and Ireland going along for the last week when Turkey, because Turkey have getting the following European Championships, which they're now doing with Italy in 2032. But returning for the first time, Everton will be hosting a major international tournament games for 62 years since the 1966 World Cup, before my time, before you say anything, Joe. But yeah, I've been doing a series on that this week. Obviously, when it came to Euro 96, they went to Anfield, the games there, and then it's going to be Everton this time round. I mean, there's been talk about why it isn't Anfield, and the simple reason is the pitch isn't big enough, isn't long enough to meet UEFA requirements, hence why Anfield can't get European finals either. But it's great boom. It's absolutely right that wherever it was going to be, that Liverpool was going to be one of the host cities, and Everton's stadium will be the venue. Colin Chong has already said he believes it will become one of the highlights of the tournament, because hopefully this stadium will be one of the most iconic grounds in there. And
it'll be the newest, won't it? It'll be the most advanced.
I mean, Belfast having theirs refurbished, but obviously Tottenham Hotspur Stadium's in there as well. But certainly in terms of other than that one in Belfast, which would be a major refurbishment, it's going to be the newest stadium there. And I'm sure that the outlook of Scousers, the people of Liverpool, also been such an international city, so cosmopolitan, welcoming the world again, and all those fans from across Europe who will be coming along. I mean, it should be a marvellous event, but obviously a while off yet, 2028, and hopefully it should be great for everyone in the city.
And by that point, Sean Dyche will have led Everton into Europe, so he'll be well used to hosting games of such calibre, won't it, hopefully?
I hope so. I mean, nothing would make me happier than that.
Would be wonderful. But an important reminder, I think, is something that I wrote about last week in my Royal Blue column. If Everton can get some of the bigger decisions right, certainly over the next couple of months and the next couple of years, there are things to be positive about and to look forward to, isn't it? They've just got to get there in the first place, haven't they? And I think getting there is obviously making progress a long way away, but that Bournemouth result, it really did help, didn't it, the other day? I mean, just having a week this week, international weeks are always difficult for us in the local media that can't really focus on what's going on internationally and get a big readership from that. But I mean, it makes a hell of a difference, this one, say, compared to the last one after the Sheffield United game when Everton still hadn't had a win. That win over Bournemouth, I know you weren't there, and that might be something that we have to think about for future games.
And Gav Buckland as well.
Regular contributor Gav Buckland. It might have to be a strategic withdrawal from big games in the future for the two of you, but that really has eased the pressure, hasn't it? I think it's important to think that 7 points from those first 8 games isn't enough. That's not a good haul. That isn't success for Everton, and that isn't success in the context of the season. Because I think when you look at the games that they have played so far, that was as welcoming a fixture list as you could have, and this really should have been a point where Everton would accumulate points to then perhaps act as a cushion going into a more difficult phase of the season. But getting that win was huge, wasn't it?
Yeah. In the defence of Gav and I, we were both there and made a 28 for an even bigger game against Bournemouth, so we can't pin it all on us. But yeah, absolutely massive, like you say, Ned. Just a feel-good factor, like you say. If it had been the other way round, if they'd have beaten Luton, which they should have been expected to do, and lost to Bournemouth, they would have the same points, but there just wouldn't have been that feeling for us going into this fortnight. And I'm sure people could appreciate we cover the club at every level more than anyone else, and so for us as well, the fact these next 2 weeks has made it a lot more easier than for us, and just in the terms of the articles we're writing and the feeling around that, it would have been very difficult, very sort of nervous still if there had been a negative result against Bournemouth. I mean, also the way that they played, I mean, everyone would have just taken a scrappy 1-0, but the fact that it was more emphatic, and first time in almost a year that they'd won by that margin at Goodison Park, just has a bit more of a spring in the step for everybody. But like you say, the points total is not what people would have hoped for and expected. I mean, that's the concern, isn't it? That when Everton had what was on paper a favourable run of fixtures, of course there are no easy games in the Premier League. It sounds like a cliche, but it's genuine fact. But they've not got as many points as they would have hoped for, and there are mitigating circumstances behind that, and we all know that Sean Dyche has been talking about the XG. I suppose it makes it tougher to take, but at least they have been competitive in most of the matches, just haven't been taking the details, as the manager says it, and to win those games. But yeah, to actually finish with that result ahead of what, of course, we're going to talk about it going forward later this week, next week, with the Derby match, and more tough games on the horizon after that. It was a real sort of relief, really, to have that performance and that result.
Next run of fixtures is really tricky, and like you say, that's something that we'll probably get onto in a bit more detail next week, particularly the build up to the Derby. But one of the things that is filling me with a little bit of hope from this week as well is and obviously we knew this was going to be the case anyway, but just to confirm that we had the training ground pictures released by the club yesterday, and one of the things that I was looking forward to, and I asked Sean about this just before the Bournemouth match, and
the gaffer to you,
and the prospect of this is the fact that you spoke about mitigating circumstances for the early results of the season there, and I think it's important to remember, obviously, how much change has undergone since the beginning of the season. It's a side that, when you look back to Fulham, Neil Maupay and Alex Iwobi were starting, Tom Cannon was the bench, all three of those have left, obviously Damari Gray as well, but obviously Beto has come in. We now have Jack Harrison back fit. We have Dwight McNeil back fit after the injury he picked up at Stoke. We have Arnaud Danjuma fit. He didn't make that starting lineup because of his own issues. And then obviously we've got Dominic Calvert-Lewin in that as well. This feels, for the first time this season or this summer, that Sean Dyche has got his frontline five in the same place, all fit, all available. This is their first opportunity to develop a relationship. This week, 10 days, fortnight, could actually be really, really useful for that. 'Cause I know that if you speak to Sean, one of the things he'll say is that international breaks are by no means as useful as people think they are, because you have a huge amount of fluctuation, who's there, who's going off on international duty, who's staying, how you're going to manage them, who do you give a break when, and things like that. And he says that really you only actually get a core 2 or 3 days with the team going into their next match, depending on when people come back from, the last few come back from international games and their respite periods. But 5 players you don't have to worry about that are Calvert-Lewin, Beto, Harrison, Danjuma and Dwight McNeil. None of them are on international duty, and they're all there training. We saw the pictures of them. Really good opportunity this for them to help try and start to develop a bit of an understanding, isn't it? And perhaps turn that attacking unit from one that creates chances but doesn't finish them, to perhaps a bit more of a cohesive, intelligent unit that can keep up that what has been an impressive run of creating chances, albeit perhaps against lesser defences that they're now going to start to come up against during this next period of games. But hopefully to be able to start putting the flesh on, sorting out those finer details which Dyche says cost them the games.
Yeah, definitely. We saw it already with Jack Harrison, the Bournemouth game, getting his first goal for the club. I mean,
what a finish!
Yeah,
I thought he took a touch. I look back at it's quite interesting. I do this sometimes, and I look back on my match reports, and my match reports aren't on the whistle, but they're really, the intention is to try and get them out, publish them about an hour after the final whistle. But with all the logistics of what we do after a game, really I have about a 10-minute window to finish off after the final whistle, because then you've got to decamp from one part of the stadium to the other, and then you've got to be ready for the managers or the players. And and your focus switches very quickly. So sometimes I kind of look back a couple of days later or a couple of hours later and think, oh God. And I must admit, in my head, I think I write this in my match report. I'm not sure, but I think I thought that Jack Harrison took a touch before he did that, because when I was looking back on my, and for those people who are listening, go to Goodison Park, the Wi-Fi is woeful, even in the media section. So for those saying, why don't you watch a replay on your phone or on your laptop before you rewrite it? It's a lot harder than that. But such was the composure and the delicateness of his, the deftness of his finish. I thought he took a touch first, but he ran onto it, didn't he? I mean,
So
sorry for that detail.
No, it was a good point, because I remember Bernard at Everton, his goal he scored against West Ham at the Park End as well, and at the time saying nobody else at Everton could have scored the goal that Bernard scored, and possibly nobody else at Everton could have scored the goal that Jack Harrison scored. So he's already brought a new dynamic to the team there. He's already given them something different there, and that's what we've been talking about there with these attacking combinations and the understandings. Beto's still very much learning his way in English football. It was great to hit the ground running 24 hours after signing. Comes off the bench at Doncaster Rovers, scores there. But in the Premier League, we've seen bits and pieces from him. He's very athletic. He's good at holding the ball up, intelligent there, but a bit more composure in front of goal. So hopefully this period can sort of help him sort of work that understanding. The renaissance of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and we can't understate that really. The way he's come back. I mean, I did a statistical look at him this week, and some of the numbers there, the increase in output from him, absolutely staggering. So it's not just the goals. Obviously, he scored 3 goals in 3 games, didn't hit the mark against Bournemouth, but again, led the line so well. Just so many, like you say, potential positives there to work upon. Actually, they've got the options. I mean, the fact that Arnott Danjuma isn't even starting the games now and is having to work to get back into the side. I mean, it's just great to have those options. And if you look what the bench was like in the first month of the season, and you're scraping along there's kids on the bench, there's players who've hardly played.
Especially Sheffield United after those final departures on the transfer deadline day. I mean, that really was a concern.
So there's so much for them to work upon and sort of develop those blossoming relationships and combinations in what is a key area, because hopefully if they can get a first clean sheet, I mean, the other end of the pitch we're talking about that, you sort of take that as a given with Dyche, but they will be Titans solid at the back, and they haven't been there. That was the first clean sheet, wasn't it, at the season against Bournemouth as well. So yeah, there's plenty to be working on, and it would be nice that they've actually got those forward options, somebody who can sort of create something out of nowhere, or have that bit of magic going forward. And hopefully Jack Harrison, this can be the first of many, because I remember speaking to his college coach from the US, because obviously he's had that sort of unorthodox sort of career path where he moved to the US before. He was playing as a teenager, and he sort of came through the college system there. And he was saying, no, he was a real special player, and we're getting to see that. Yeah,
well, I think we'll leave it there on that relatively positive note. Thanks very much for joining us for this latest edition of Royal Blue. Obviously, international break, so a little bit shorter than normal, but we're grateful for Giulia to come in as well and give us her insight. And we'll be back on. I should be back on Monday, I think, as we start the tentative countdown to the derby, don't we? So thanks very much for joining us. We hope you have a wonderful weekend, and keep smiling. Thank you.